Wit and humor in the songs of Charles Ives. Several years ago, I bought an album of songs for voice and piano by Charles Ives. I became obsessed with certain tracks and shared them with anyone willing to listen. Here I examine two of my favorites, 1, 2, 3, and The Cage. Nicholas E. Tawa notes Ives' propensity for comic parody and his delight in incorporating commonplace matter from everyday life into a composition. We will find both of these things to be true in the course of this exploration. Ives' unorthodox approach to composition poses a challenge for analysts. Musical patterns sometimes vanish as soon as they are established. Take, for example, the highlighted figures in the following excerpt from 1, 2, 3. One might expect that these adjacent thirds would remain important, but they do not reappear in the rest of the song. By adopting a more global and historical perspective, I will show how Ives' seemingly ill-matched musical components serve the greater purpose of communication. Ives conveys wit and humor in these short experimental works through the principle of opposition. One, two, three. Why doesn't 1, 2, 3 seem to appeal to a Yankee as much as 1, 2? This piece is, in part, a commentary on cultural differences between the US and Europe. For Ives, dismantling tonality was a crucial part of questioning and circumventing the European tradition. Ives' challenges to the tonal system represent a rejection of inherited European and, by implication, dominant German attitudes. The connections to 1, 2, 3 are clear. The waltz is emblematic of German culture in the same way that marches are emblematic of American culture. It should also be noted that Charles' father, George Ives, was a bandmaster for the Union Army during the American Civil War and subsequently dedicated himself to his son's musical education. In 1, 2, 3, distorted rhythms and chromatic lines come together in a parody of the waltz. Consider other oppositions that add to the humor of the song. The introduction is longer than the vocal melody, 18 and 13 measures respectively. The vocal line uses the notes of the diatonic 0 sharp, 0 flat collection with only one accidental and is clearly in C major. This is contrasted by the highly chromatic and largely atonal piano accompaniment, which you will see in the score. Other details add to the quirky character of the song. For example, the question in the lyrics is concluded not with a question mark, but with an exclamation. This, in combination with the articulation in the final bar, drives home the martial cadence. See the example on this slide. Additionally, as we will see, both songs examined in this presentation end with an offbeat cadence. The especially humorous origins of 1, 2, 3. While at Yale, Ives frequently entertained himself and his friends with piano improvisations that he called takeoffs or stunts. A decade later, he used his stunting techniques in creating several pieces of music that were inspired by athletics. 1, 2, 3 is derived in part from Ives' sketch Takeoff Number 3, Rube Trying to Walk 2 to 3. At the end of the sketch, Ives wrote, "Written as a joke, plus sounds like one." The Rube in the title refers to Baseball Hall of Famer George Rube Waddell. Waddell would wander off from games to go fishing, or to tend bar in some saloon, or to lead a circus parade, or to ride on fire engines, or to pitch for some hick ball club upstate. Real-life events likely inspired Ives' title for the sketch. Waddell's team was leading when an enthusiastic fan suggested he fill the bases and strike out the side. Willing always to oblige, Rube walked the next two batters, fanned the next two, and eventually won the game. According to the contemporary literature, Rube tried this stunt more than once. Perhaps Ives' title refers to stories such as this one, which depicts Rube actually trying to walk 2 to 3 batters. The cage. A leopard went around his cage from one side back to the other side. He stopped only when the keeper came around with meat. A boy who had been there 3 hours began to wonder, "Is life anything like that?" In 1906, Ives wrote several highly original and experimental pieces that raise basic questions about the nature of music and its stylistic and structural possibilities. The two most important in this regard are In the Cage from the Set for Theatre Orchestra and The Unanswered Question. In the Cage is the piece on which the later song The Cage is based, and like 1, 2, 3, it has a humorous origin. Inspiration for In the Cage came from a visit to Central Park Zoo with Burt Young and George Lewis. As they watched a leopard pacing endlessly around his cage, Burt speculated, "Is life anything like that?" Young's witty remark was later used as the end of the song. There are some notable differences between the original piece for theater orchestra and the song for voice and piano. The atonal effect is considerably heightened in the chamber orchestra piece from which the song is derived. There, a number of additional features complicate the musical texture, notably the tritone figure A D sharp, played ostinato by the timpani. Swafford writes, "We hear a wordless whole-tone tune in the English horn, a series of apparently independent and meterless fourth chords, and a hypnotically repeated timpani figure, the leopard, which also goes its own way." In The Cage, Ives uses several devices to convey confinement and pacing, including a melody that is almost exclusively stepwise within a limited range, the repetition of groups of chords, mirrored patterns within the vocal line, see the example on this slide, and alternations between whole tone collections, trapped, so to speak, in limited transposition. The last 3 chords of the song are an exact repetition of the 3 chords under A Leopard Went Around His Cage, which are, in turn, the same as the first 3 chords of the song, only transposed. Thus the song ends where it began, trapped. Both the melody and accompaniment continue to move in every direction but are unable to escape either whole tone collections or quartal harmonies respectively. The last system is the one notable exception. Here, the vocal line is largely, though not entirely, in E major, and the chord under wonder is unique in the song. Before examining this chord, an important correction should be noted. The pitches near the middle of the bass staff should be D and F sharp, not D sharp and F. Knowing this, we can better understand the chord's construction. See the image on this slide. It should also be acknowledged that the rhythm in the piano is sometimes inconsistent with the rhythmic values in the vocal line. In critical commentaries, Hitchcock notes Ives' irrational durations. Ives conceived the piece without bar lines, though some were later added in both the piece for theatre orchestra and the song for voice and piano. In 1973, Leonard Bernstein gave a series of lectures at Harvard University called The Unanswered Question, referring, of course, to Ives' composition from 1908. Bernstein discussed Ives' piece and also addressed a variety of other topics, including humor in music. His comments aptly describe Ives' strategy for communicating wit and humor through his music. Quote, "Jokes feed on what is incongruous," he said. He also characterized art in the 20th century as based on, quote, "the big existentialist joke, namely the sense of the absurd." Incongruous elements or oppositions and a sense of the absurd do indeed pervade Ives' music and continue to make us laugh and think today.